Hello, everyone. And just as a reminder, this event is being recorded. You won't be seen in the recording, and you will be muted. So don't worry that you'll be visible to us. So I'll just start here. I just wanted to hello and welcome to everyone. This is the first of our headline events celebrating Book Week and delivered in partnership between Libraries NI and BBC Northern Ireland. My name is Lily Gillis, and today we're launching our big read. The book we're hoping everyone is reading during Book Week is Forget Me Not by Claire Allan, a psychological thriller which will keep you on the edge of your seat. Claire is a well-known author from Derry and has written a number of crime novels, as well as others under the pen name of Freya Kennedy. We're delighted to welcome Claire to discuss her book and give an insight into her writing. We're also joined today by Richard O'Reilly, BBC Radio Ulster journalist and presenter. Welcome, Richard.
Hi.
If you have any questions for our author, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, and we will endeavour to answer as many as possible. I will now hand over to Richard, who will interview Claire for us this afternoon.
Lily, thank you very much. You're all very welcome along. Great to have you. Great to be a part of Book Week again. Really good week. Really important. I think it's 8 years now. This has been running. It's always really good partnership as well with the BBC, so we get quite excited about it. It's a good chance to sort of celebrate books, celebrate libraries, and just get a bit of a chat. I'm delighted that I'm getting a chance to speak to someone. I have, full disclosure, spoken to Claire many times over the years. A lot of the times on the radio, not always with this face-to-face idea, but it is great that we can do this, and it's nice we can do it from the comfort of our own home. The pandemic did give us a couple of good things, and Claire Allan is with me, author, former journalist, all-round good egg. How are you, Claire? You all right?
I am good. I'm going to just let everybody know, Richard knows this already, I have a puppy who has managed to break her way into my office, and so if you hear squeaking or barking or anything, it's not me, it's the puppy. She keeps getting in. So that said, I'm grand, Richard, and it's lovely to be here, and it's lovely to be here supporting Libraries NI.
Yeah, I love your little room there. You have you've got your little board behind you and everything. That's I'm presumably that's an insight.
Just been cleaned because I finished my latest thriller yesterday, so it was wiped down ceremoniously last night, and I'm moving on to the next Freya Kennedy book. So there's just a couple of wee things scribbled up there. No spoilers, so it's grand.
Absolutely. No, we'll actually work really hard on no spoilers today, but we're going to start. I want to take you way back. This is a real journey into the psyche here, Claire. We're going to have so try not to look so frightened. I suppose I want to take you back to young little Claire Allan and just get an idea of how really broadly how important books are to you, and how important have they been to you, not just writing them, which is such an enviable thing that you do, but reading them and growing up with them.
Well, I never would have become a writer if I hadn't been such a voracious reader as a child, and books were always something that featured really strongly through my childhood from we were really young. So before we could read, my mum and dad would have sat down and read to us. And then my biggest influence probably for reading as a child was the Cregan Library. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on with Libraries NI. It was literally a huge part of my childhood. So I grew up in Cregan, and every Saturday, me and my brother and my sisters, we would traipse up to the library. It was like an old porta cabin then, and it's kind of had that musty smell of wet coats because it was always raining. And I can see now where the children's book section was, and I went in, and you had the first time you could go in and lift a book and look at the cover and choose it for yourself. It wasn't a homework book, it wasn't a reading book, it was something you were picking out for yourself to take home. So I was that one that went home with the big pile of books every week, read through them, back up, and moved on to the next lot. I think I worked my way through most of the children's section. So without
where would you have gone first? What would have been the first port of call for kids' books? I'd just be curious.
You see, I loved the Enid Blyton Secret Seven books. For some reason, Famous Five didn't really do it for me the same way, but it was Secret Seven. There was something about that sort of gang of young kids going out and getting into all sorts of mystery and troubles. And they had a den, which was the shed with, you know, the gingham curtains, and they had, you know, cucumber sandwiches and whatever else that Enid Blyton wrote about. And I just thought that sounded like the best crack, like having a den where you would meet your friends and then you would go out and solve these mysteries and that. It just sounded so brilliant. So any chance I could get to read something like that, that was my first big passion. And then I suppose the Roald Dahl books and Auntie Judy Bloom, and, you know, moving up as I grew older, obviously the authors I were interested in changed, and but definitely without those Secret Seven, I'd still love a den in the garden with gingham curtains and, you know, having a lemonade on a sunny day before we go hunting for baddies.
And plummy posh voices as well when you do
Exactly.
it. So fun.
Exactly. I know, jolly good fun. We just had, like, you know, the Craigan Reservoir to run around in the woods and mud pies and whatever else. We did it our way, but it's just that sense of adventure and imagination that those books really captured.
But that's the thing as well. I mean, we can talk a bit more about the libraries as well, but it is like, first of all, my sister was big into Secret Seven, which meant I wasn't allowed to be. That's how siblings work, you know.
Yeah.
But Roald Dahl, I'm right on board with you. But it is, I suppose, libraries are just, it is that idea of choice. But for you, was it just the fact you get a book and read it, but also it's a place to go where books live and breathe, and the whole place, the atmosphere of a library.
Exactly. You know, like I joke about the smell of the damp coats, but it's so evocative. I can still, if I think about it, I can still smell it, and the electric radiators and the kind of dry heat that came off it, and then mixed with the smell of the paper and the books and the feel of the books with the, you know, like the plastic covering on them that you would get in a library, and even the clunk of the stamper to stamp your book out and things like that. It was such just a fun, wholesome experience. And then, you know, times you might sneak in and look at books that maybe you probably shouldn't have been looking at and things, you know, all
curse word here and there,
the odd wee bad word. And I remember one it was movie horror makeup they had, and it was absolutely terrifying. And we were getting our photo taken for the Derry Journal for some reason. It must have been probably a week like this, a libraries week or something, and the Journal came up and the librarian gathered a whole pile of us all around her, and the book that she's seen reading us in this in the picture that was published in the newspaper is this horror makeup book, and, you know, we're all there smiling like really happy children, and there's this horrific image. So it is part of my joy, and I think that, you know, we're talking about in the 80s in Derry, things were not necessarily, you know, great, and that was such a pure form of joy. You didn't need any money. Well,
it's a great leveler, isn't it? Anybody can go in and
anybody can go in, and the choice is there, and you can read whatever you want and experience 100 different worlds, and you know, that's the joy of it. But yeah, that it's so vivid in my mind, the memories of that, particularly the Craigan Library, but I suppose probably all the libraries in Derry have a wee place for me.
You then went into journalism first and foremost, primarily print media. Was it the writing aspect of that appealed to you, or was it the journalistic aspect, or was this always a stepping stone? I don't know if writing was always somewhere in the back of your mind.
I always wanted to write, but I don't think that I thought it was something that people from Craigan did. That sounds, you know, sort of strange. It seemed to me like authors seemed like these sort of big personas, and they lived in fancy houses, and like, obviously I know a lot bit different now, but they were so removed from us. So, but I loved writing. So I thought, well, how can I make a career out of writing? Because chances are I'm not going to be a novelist. So I went into print journalism, and it was a very it was a very clear-cut decision for me to go into print. It was the writing that I loved, the sitting and crafting stories. And it is, obviously, it's a completely different discipline and you can't make things up and you can't go off your own wee tangent, but it was still being able to tell stories in a way that people wanted to read, which is why in journalism, I particularly love doing human interest pieces. So going out and speaking to these like remarkable people within our society who you wouldn't know in the street as they walk past that they have a remarkable story, but I was able to tell their side of things. And that was an incredible privilege. I mean, you'll know that, Richard, it is such a privilege to be trusted to tell somebody's story. And I would just love spending whatever time I could up until deadline, making it just perfect in print.
And it's not always an easy gig either. I'm not saying that with a sort of Hermes, but I mean, psychologically and emotionally, it can be hard to keep it disconnected.
It definitely is, and that's something that I found, and I have spoken about, and I actually contributed to a chapter in Leon O'Neill's book Breaking, which is about things that journalists have experienced in the newsroom. So for me, where I find it difficult, particularly difficult, obviously we dealt with tragedy. I went into journalism in 1999. So my first day as a journalist was the week of the first anniversary of the Oma bombing. So I arrive in completely green into the Derry Journal office, and the first thing my then deputy editor says to me is, "You're going to Buncrana to speak to one of the families who lost a child last year," which was a great privilege and an honour. How they let me into their house and how they were so generous with their time and their grief to tell the story was beyond humbling. But sitting listening to a mother talk about her child who has been killed, especially in such a horrific fashion, that stays with you. So over the course of 17 years, you hear 17 years worth of grieving mothers and, grieving children and people who've been through incredible things, people who've overcome illness, whatever else. And that all feeds into you. As a journalist, it's your job to go out and speak to those people, then go back to your desk and to write their story and get it done for deadline. And it's only really when you go home afterwards, or maybe even when you give it a bit of space, that you process exactly what it is that you've heard and witnessed and been there for. And, and I've stood on roadsides where people have been killed. I've seen pools of blood. I've seen, the whole gamut of the journalistic experience. But I don't think I really realised how much of it I was carrying with me until I actually left journalism and started writing thrillers, because suddenly all this like wave of experiences allowed me to tap into sort of the darker sides of life.
Is that cathartic because you're able to, I don't suppose, control the dark aspects of what's there as well?
Absolutely. It's so cathartic because I can, I can decide who's going to be the bad guy. And the best thing about writing crime, and every crime writer you speak to will tell you this, is when you're writing crime and when you're reading crime, one of the highlights of it is generally by the end of the book, you get a sense of justice. So the bad guy gets their comeuppance. Everything is right with the world again by the time you turn that final page. And you're able to control that and do it in like a really timely fashion. And there are no miscarriages of justice really, unless it's a very intentional plot point, but the bad guy gets got basically. And to be able to do that when that isn't always the case in real life is very satisfying.
That transfer then from journalism into writing, I mean, did that happen? Presumably there wasn't a day where I'm not a journalist now, I'm now a writer. I'm assuming it was a little bit more fluid.
It was fluid. I wrote my first novel in 2000 and I never remember what year it is, 2006. So my son, my eldest child, was just 2 at the time, and I'd always wanted to write anyway. And I used to talk, me and my deputy editor at the Derry Journal at the time, Tuesday afternoons were like our downtime. The paper was printed and we would have sort of quiet time in the newsroom, and whatever, we always talked about what books we were reading, what authors we liked. She always talked about how she wanted to write a book someday, and I wanted to write a book someday. But life gets in the way. I had a really young child. She had 4 young daughters. And it was late 2005 that she took ill. Siobhan McElhaney was her name. I must mention her name before I go any further. And sadly, she passed away. But shortly before she did, I went to visit her, and her last words to me were, "You better write something good for me, girl." So I took that as my impetus to finally sit down and write the book that I always said I was going to write. And within that next 6 months, I had written the book, and I had got an agent, and it was within 9 months of that, I had a book deal. So out of tragedy, and it was tragedy, came that change in my career, and that sort of kick up the bum. But for 8 books and for 8 years or so, I combined working as a journalist and writing women's fiction novels. And it wasn't until 2016 in the end that I became a full-time writer, which was a huge leap of faith. But I'm glad I did it.
What actually, I mean, I know you got a book deal, but what made it you suddenly realize that, okay, I can do this for a living rather than just something I wanted to do?
The thing is that I didn't know that I would be able to do it for a living. It was like taking a chance. So I got the opportunity, came up to take voluntary redundancy. And at the same time, I was having certain conversations with certain publishers that I knew there was, my career was going to take a different direction. But I never knew if it was going to work out. But at that time, I thought, do you know what? You have to take a chance at some stage. Because if not, I was always going to go, well, what if that was my big time? That opportunity for voluntary redundancy, it was a decent enough package. It gave me, a cushion to be able to, take time out of paid employment for a year to write. So I said I would give myself a year to see if I could get a book deal and see if I could make a career of it. And it was a year and 2 days after I left that job that, I got the big book deal with HarperCollins. And so I haven't really looked back since then.
So talk us through the writing process. Well, first of all, talk us through the writing process in the early days, because I don't know, does it change from that first time? I mean, how you set out like that first one?
Absolutely. I mean, because the first one, I was so naive, and I think blissfully naive. There's something great about ignorance, because I didn't really know the procedure. I didn't really know anything. I just thought, I'm going to write a book, and I had read so many that I just thought, I know what I'm doing, and sat down and just poured this book out of me. I didn't know how the industry worked. I didn't know anything really about the business side of it. I still don't really know too much about the business side of it, to be honest. And because I was working full time and I was a mum to a young child, it was like stolen hours or stolen 15 minutes or whatever time I could, I was writing. So I wrote through my lunch breaks. I got up early in the morning when my son was still sleeping and wrote, or after he went to bed at night. Like, God love that child. He was fired under the cot at 7 o'clock of an evening, so I could sit and write for an hour or two. And that time was very precious. And when you have that, like, really, those small bundles of time, you make the most of them. So I just wrote, and I thought it was a brilliant experience. I loved it, that book. I wrote it relatively quickly, certainly quickly for a first-time author. And I kind of thought that after that, oh, sure, this is all right. This is kind of easy, really. I'll be grand. And then I tried to write the second book, and it was a different story. But every book is different. So every process is slightly different. It never gets easier. I mean, I know a lot now about, structure, all the boring side of writing, you talk about structure and how to build your characters and all that, plot points. And I know a lot about that now. But ultimately, each book has a personality of its own. And it's like I say it's like, pregnancies nearly. You can have an easy pregnancy or an absolute horror. And some of them have been absolute horrors. They tend to have been the better books when it's done, though.
The real labor ones.
Look back on and go, that was worth it. nearly killed me at the time, but it was worth it. So each book is slightly different.
So
But I'm not a plotter. That's the one thing people ask. I don't really plot. I don't come up with a big, massive, diagram before I write. I have an idea, and I just go for it.
because I was going to say, I mean, I'll resist the urge to ask that really annoying questions that people always ask a writer about where your ideas from, all that carry on. But I would love to know. I mean, you're thinking, right, time for a new book. You just finished one recently. I mean, what's first? What do you do first? Do you sit down and try to think of things, or is there always something kind of knocking around there?
Sometimes there is, and sometimes there isn't, which is the most honest answer I can give you. One thing that I have needed to teach myself nearly is that as a writer, thinking time is as valid as writing time. So sometimes I can go, oh God, I haven't written in 3 days, or I haven't written in 2 weeks, or I don't know what my next idea is going to be, and I can panic. God, maybe I'm broken. Maybe I've written as many words as I'm ever going to write, and this is it. It's done. Or I'm caught out. But if you sort of sit with it for a wee while, an idea always comes in. And again, this is where I sound as if I am possibly, like mentally unwell, because it's always like a voice. It's always a character that comes to me and sort of merely asks me to tell their story, but I always get a real sense of a person. So all my stories focus around character. For me as a writer, plot is nearly secondary to creating believable characters, flawed characters. None of my characters are ever perfect. They all are human. And it builds from there. So I never quite know where the ideas are going to come from. It could be somebody could tweet something, or I could see an interaction between two people in the supermarket or whatever, and my mind just goes off in its own wee world. But sooner or later, there'll be a very firm character in my head going, it's my turn.
What does the writing day look like? So do you write where you're sitting now? Because like Roald Dahl would have famously gone down to his little shed at the back of his garden.
Yeah.
Like, do you
I
have
write where I do. This is my office, and I am so blessed, so lucky, because we only moved to this house last year, and before then it was writing on the sofa or on top of my bed or at the kitchen table, and I never had a designated space. So we moved last year, and I have this lovely office, which means I can have the whiteboard and I can scribble ideas on it, and especially as the books move on, that will be covered in all sorts of nonsense, but it keeps me right. And I have my desk, and I have my wee fan, and everything's set up just exactly as I like it. And I spend most of my life probably in this room, normally with 2 dogs lying sleeping at my feet. But the best thing about having a writing space is that I suppose at the end of the day, then I can go out and close the door and try not to think about it until the next morning when I come back in. When you're writing and you're sitting constantly on your sofa or on your bed or whatever else, your work and life comes so enmeshed. It's really hard to switch off. So no, I love having my wee office. It is just my favorite place.
It's very tidy, to be fair, considering you stay there the whole time.
If you had seen it yesterday, Richard, when I was trying to finish this latest book, it was not tidy. I gave it a good clean yesterday, going, oh, I'm going to be doing this thing for libraries, and I have to do it. So tidied the shelves and reorganized everything. Yesterday, it was like a bomb went off, and it was carnage. But the book could finish, so that's the only thing that matters.
I mean, does it give you a bit of discipline as well, having an office to go to? Because you're self-employed, basically.
Yeah.
When all said and done, you need someone, because where the rest of us, we have a rota to work to. You got to do that yourself.
And you have to be so disciplined, because especially when you're writing commercial fiction, I'm writing between 2 and 3 books a year, so that's really fast schedule to be working in. So people don't always realize that writing the first draft of a book, writing the story, is about 1/3 of what I do. And my rest of my time is spent, editing or in marketing meetings or doing PR or doing writers' retreats or whatever else. So I have a very limited window in which to actually sit and get a book written. So I will write a book. The one that I've just finished probably took about 10 weeks in total to write. So at 86,000 words, that's quite a, that's
Quite
quite
an
a
intense
turnover.
process, that.
So you have to basically put your bum on the seat every day. So it's nearly the first thing I do when I get up in the morning. I go and make sure the dogs are okay, and then come and sit down and settle myself in. And obviously I take breaks to walk the dogs, do the school run, to the things that need to be done family wise. But basically from about 7 o'clock in the morning to 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'll generally most of the time be here.
A lot of people are getting some questions, and we'll come to them. Keep them coming. We'll come to them in the last 15 minutes, but please do keep submitting them. I suppose we'll get on to, I have my copy here of Forget Me Not with its little book of the month sticker on it, just to show it as a library copy. In fact, I have 2 copies of it because myself and my wife decided we'd co-read this one. Thoroughly enjoyed. We're not going to give too much detail away because obviously this is a thriller, and it's got twists, it's got turns. We can say that much, and if we give a bit too much detail, we want you to go out and get these yourself and have a read at it. First of all, give me a little bit of thought on this one. First of all, do you remember starting this one?
I do remember starting it because the idea of this book opens with our older lady she's out walking her dog. Every good crime novel has a dog walker finding something, and she comes across a woman who is very close to death side of the country road very early in the morning in a heat wave, and she goes to her aid, and the woman issues a warning to her, warn them just before she dies. So immediately we've set the scene. So we then the story moves between this older woman and a sort of how she becomes completely involved in the story, and also between 3 friends. It is quite difficult to say too much, but we find out that somebody really is looking for revenge. We don't quite know what for. We don't know who it is, but they're definitely intent that the first person who died is not going to be the last person who died. So I sometimes compare it with like Derry Girls meets Seven or something like that, because there's a school friend helping friends go back to their school days. So we flash back to school days at times. And obviously there's a serial killer element as well. So if that's not a pitch that pulls you in,
that's a good one. I mean, do you remember, where you were saying sometimes thoughts can be a conversation or something. Can you remember where the thoughts for this one, for Forget Me Nots, came from? Or maybe, I don't know if you write them, or is that it? They're done, they're gone, and you move on?
Some of them stay with you more than others. This one, I remember this, writing this for one reason and one reason only. I wrote a big portion of this. I went on a writer's retreat. There's a place up in County Down in the River Mill, and it's the most gorgeous place in the middle of the country. It's the first time I went, booked 5 days away just to write because my deadline was so tight, and it was basically writing from morning to night. But because I knew the time was so precious, it was like, right. I was so engrossed in the book. And I was sharing, also staying at the retreat that week was Louise Kennedy and Liz Nugent and stuff. So these other amazing writers, and we would talk about the books, and we would ideas back and forth and whatever else. So this one, the writing process where it stays in my head, because I was writing so intensely, I kept a notebook at my side, and I would write, and then ideas would come to me and I would just scribble them down. And that book seemed to, people hate it when writers say this, but that book seemed to write itself. It just sort of spilled out onto the page. It was an absolute joy to write. The initial idea came, I had the idea of the body at the roadside, and this morning, and
let's go from there.
It built from there. But the character, the older character of Elizabeth, she was only ever supposed to be in that first chapter, and she wasn't supposed to feature again. But I say to you, like, characters come in and they go, hang on, tell me, tell my story. She kept coming back, and she had a story to tell. She's one of my favorite characters of all time to write. I just loved writing her. She had such a strong voice. She was brilliant.
Yeah, actually, she's a great character, and I mean, a couple of themes I think that come across in here. And please stop me if I'm completely
Okay.
off, and that's not what you intended whatsoever. But uh, I think memory is a big one. Really, like memory as to who you were and who you are now.
Well, that's it. I mean, God, I'm going to talk about cancel culture and stuff. We don't allow, in this modern world, I don't think we allow too much for growth. So as younger people, as more ignorant people, as teenagers, we may have said and done things that we wouldn't do in this day and age, or we wouldn't be proud of, or we didn't realize at the time that we were doing something that might have caused harm. So you can be a completely different person as an adult, but it's how that memory has stayed with somebody else, I suppose. And one of the biggest problems I think we do have in society today is that we look back and go, well, you said this in 2004, you're a bad person. But
When you
people
were 16,
change, and they learn and they move on. So can we really hold people accountable for something that happened 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? Obviously, there's some things you have to be held accountable for, but is how open to interpretation is it, and how much do we allow for personal growth and look at the life that the person is leading now and the good that they're doing now with their lives when we decide how we're going to treat them.
Friendship's a big one as well, because especially long-lasting friendship, especially early on when this happens, and Rachel doesn't want to speak to her family at all. There's only one person she wants to go and talk to, and that's her other friend.
That's it. I mean, I imagine it's the same for you fellas, but I know for me, the longest lasting friendships that I have were those that I made in secondary school. And I don't know whether it's something about you're fully conscious when you start secondary school, whereas when you're in primary school, you don't really know what you're doing. You're still attached to your mummy nearly. But secondary school, you're all thrown in this one big sort of boat together, and you sink or swim, and you make these new friendships, and those tend to be the friendships that stay for life. And they're almost like family relationships. Those are the girls that will be with you through everything. So yeah, friendship does feature really strongly. This is why it's a wee bit like Dairy Girls, you see. And I know for me, like my friends that I went to school with, they're the ones that I would turn to. The characters are not based on them in any way. I have to say that.
Oh yeah, I guess like those disclaimers you get at the start
really,
of
really
the
quick.
film.
Yeah. But I certainly relate to those relationships, and and yeah, sometimes you might look back and wonder, God, we were wild idiots, or we were wild, we weren't very nice to that person or whatever, and how we examine ourselves as adults as to how we were then.
Of course, you've also got such a wide-ranging number of characters in here, but there's one constant, and that is Derry itself. I mean, a lot of your right, Derry, the Northwest at large, and I'd love to get a sense of how important that is to you. I mean, did it start off as writing what you know, or was it just like, this is the place I love, so this is the place I'm going to write about?
It's a bit of both. I mean, obviously writing what you know, but I do love it, and the more I write, the more I want to delve into Derry as a character. So when I was first writing, I thought people aren't going to want to read books set in Derry. Everything that was my naivety, thinking that, people wanted to read books that were set in really glamorous locations, and Derry didn't seem particularly glamorous when I was starting writing, I suppose. But it was when I started writing the thrillers. And what's interesting, I wrote 8 women's fiction with a Dublin publisher, and they would have sort of had me tone down the Derryisms and add some Dublinisms so that it would relate more to the readers. When I moved to HarperCollins, who were based in London, and that UK publisher, they really said, up the Derry, we want to know more about it. We want to hear how people talk. We want to know more about the location. We want to know the places. And we want you to play on the geography of the area and that. And I think Derry makes an incredible location for any fiction, but particularly for crime fiction, because we have a very obviously troubled past. There's a lot of latent trauma going on. We have the geographical division of the city with a river. We have mountains, we have beaches, we have woods, it's all there. We have a city that very much has a small town feeling to it, so everybody knows everybody's business. And I think that's one of the best things that, because that sounds really negative, that everybody knows everybody's business. It's not meant that way.
No, no, of course, yeah. It's
Somebody did say to me once, why are you writing about, that council estate in that way, how they're talking and what they're doing? You're coming across a bit snobbish. And I said, oh, that's where I grew up. That's how I speak. That's, those are the experiences that I have. And if I didn't write those authentically, then that's the snobbiness. That's changing how people live to fit a mold. So I love writing our humor and our, I suppose, our courage and our resilience, all that, putting that into characters. Every book of mine as a love letter to the study, particularly from the thrillers and then the rom-coms on. It's all about how brilliant it is here. And I can't imagine not setting a book here.
A lot of your journalistic experience as well seems to be in this too, because you know police process, you know what they do, and there is a journalist in her. Yeah. She's quite nefarious, so I'm not suggesting she's based on you in the slightest.
She is a brilliant character. She's a really divisive character. She's horrible. She is horrible, but people love her. So she's actually the protagonist in one of my other books that follows, because people love to hate her. She's actually got a good heart, but she's not very ethical. She's all about getting the story no matter what, Ingrid. And yeah, it was fun to actually go on and play with that journalism side and to make her, at times you see, particularly in the book, that she's the protagonist and the reality of journalism. But sometimes it's fun to play on the sort of caricature side of it too, the kind of slightly dodgy journalist just trying to get a story. We have to do that.
There's pressure as well.
Entertainment, yeah. And yourself as a journalist, we are under pressure, increased pressure with a 24/7 news cycle to get the story and get it as quick as possible. That's Ingrid. She does that, and she doesn't care how she gets it, as long as she gets that headline. She's happy, and I love writing her. She's good crack. She's always in the background somewhere in my books. She always gets a wee mention.
Why do you think Derry is producing, and probably traditionally has produced, so many creatives and creative interest? We've seen it very recently, especially. The school in this is basically the school of Derry girls, pretty much, in many ways, isn't it? It's such a hotbed at the minute, and sort of has been for quite a while for creativity.
Lisa McGee was 2 years younger than me in school, so that school, we were great. They created lots of us, but you've Brian McGilloway. I think we are naturally a study of storytellers, and we always have been. I know there was nothing better to me than going to my grandparents' house and listening to my granddad talk about, life down in the docks and what life was like for him growing up, and then my daddy talking about the worst of the troubles and whatever. And you would sit, and Derry people have such a way of telling their story and such an authenticity to it. But they never perhaps had the means or the opportunity to put it down in print until more recently, where we have more freedom, we have more opportunity to sit and write and to get our story out there. And people are more open to reading stories set here. For a long time, even the mention of Derry turned people off, or the mention of Northern Ireland turned people off, because they thought they would be getting a certain kind of book or a certain kind of story and nothing else. What I'm trying to do, and Brian and Steve Kavanagh and Sharon Dempsey and all these writers that are right now, we're trying to do is go, there's ordinary life here. There's a full, the full spectrum of experience, and not only that, we have great characters and a natural flair for storytelling. So we're just trying to share that with the world. And I think probably Lisa McGee has done the most of everybody to open doors for writers from here of every discipline, because people are just dying to find out more about Derry and Northern Ireland now.
Do you ever read these back yourself? Do you ever read them?
Sometimes. It's very hard for me, because I immediately start picking it apart and going, oh, could you change that bit, or I would change that sentence. A book is never done in a writer's mind. But then sometimes I do pick them up and start reading, and I don't remember writing it, and I'm going, did I oh, that's quite good, actually.
That's
Oh,
very, I like that.
you know, and that I love that experience. It's definitely better than the ones where you read it and you go, oh, that sentence is a bit clunky or whatever else. But it's once I'm done with the book, when you're writing a book, it goes through about 5 different edits. So I have read this book at least 5 times, rewritten it. I feel as if I sort of know it back to front by the time I'm finished with it. And basically by the time of publication, once I'm done promoting it, I go through a phase where I never want to see it again for as long as I live. And then I sort of fall in love with them again after a wee break. It's a very intense relationship.
Do you get a chance to read much then of things that aren't your own? I mean, do you get, because you have such a love affair with reading from childhood, do you still get to fulfill that? Do you get the free time, or maybe, I don't know, if you never want to see a book again for a few weeks?
Sometimes it's overwhelming. What I've found really helped me, because I'm spending all my day at a computer screen, and like I'm getting older and my eyes are getting tired and all that. By the end of the day, or picking up a book to read, I was falling asleep. So audiobooks are my absolute savior. I started with the Libby app actually from Libraries NI, so I could download audiobooks, and then when I'm out walking the dog, or I'm doing the housework, or I'm in the car driving somewhere, a school run or a longer run is brilliant. I just stick on an audiobook and I'm transported to a different world. So I'm still, you know, experiencing the stories and having them come to life for me, but I just tend to more or less do it in a different way now. I still do read, but audiobooks is, I would go through maybe 2 audiobooks a week. I love them. That's my sort of relaxation time.
We've about a couple of minutes until we have to go to a bit of a Q&A, but I mean, who do you read at the moment? Who stands out for you?
Oh, I know she's doing an event this week. I've just finished Lisa Jewell's latest book, None of This Is True. Oh my God, it is probably one of the best books that I have ever listened to. I actually listened to it on audiobook, and it's absolutely incredible. So twisty and turny and gripping and tense. And so that's my big one of the minute that I have to recommend to everybody. But I love Brian McGillivray's books, and I'm not just saying that because he's a fellow Derry fella. I think he's an incredible writer, and he's only getting better with each book. The Last Crossing, which was, I think, his book before last, is an absolutely stunning piece of work, and everybody should read it. It's a stunning piece on legacy and our past here, but told in a really accessible way. You don't feel you're being preached at. But I love Jane Casey's crime series and Helen Field's crime series, and I will read lots of different things. I love reading women's fiction. When I was writing this latest thriller, when I'm writing a thriller, I tend to focus more on reading a different genre so that I'm not stealing somebody's words or whatever else. So I've been reading a lot of Lindsay Kelk and Barry McFarlane and Jane Fallon, and like really light and upbeat stuff. So just anything and everything.
Do you have this is the last one I'll ask you before we go to the Q&A, but do you have a favorite book? Not your own. I'm not saying you would pick one of your own anyway, but do you have a favorite book of someone else's to have read? And then we'll ask you what your favorite of your own is.
I have 2 books that I would recommend of other authors to me that are incredible. The first is Rachel's Holiday by Marion Keyes, which to me was it was a game changer. It was a genre changer. It was the first time I read somebody being, I suppose, really authentic and funny, and dealing with a very serious issue, which was alcoholism or addiction, in a really funny way that you were laughing and crying, and it was just brilliant. And I read that when I was 20, and I still remember everything about reading it. So that's how I know it's such a big book. And that one sort of made me think I want to write. And the other book that I would always recommend to people is The Last Days of Rabbit Haze by Anna McPartland, which it's called The Last Days of Rabbit Haze. So it's about somebody who's dying, who's in a hospice, and it's their last days. So it sounds absolutely the most depressing book you'll ever read, but it is the most uplifting book you will ever read in your life. You will cry, but you will laugh. Just the most incredible cast of characters, and she's an amazing writer. So those are my two ultimate. People should get out and get them straight away.
Well, look, thanks for those recommendations. Well, Claire, we'll get to some of the questions now that have been put in. It's about quarter to two now. So we'll start with Olga's first one, who asks, why did you choose the name Freya Kennedy to write in addition to your own name? For anyone who doesn't know, you have a pseudonym that you write under as well. And there are different style of books as well. You've one out quite recently, actually, don't you?
Yeah, the one came out last week. And just to flash it. Don't start.
Yeah, get it.
Let's just start. Freya Kennedy, this is going to sound terrible. Do you know, I didn't really come up with that name, the publishers did. So what we want, the reason I write under a different name is because it is so different. And we wanted to keep, if people were picking up a Claire Allan book, they knew they were going to get, you know, like murder and badness and whatever else. If they pick up a Freya Kennedy book, they're going to get dogs and cakes, and you know, they're shamelessly lighthearted and romantic and very idealistic. They couldn't be more different. So very clever publishers, when they're looking at how to do these things, looked into all these lovely little analytical things, and they came back with the name, and they went, we think this name will attract people, particularly in America. So it was a business decision. I would love to say it's named after somebody or that, but it really was a business decision. I didn't mind what name they put on it, but that's the official reason is to divide the two genres very clearly.
That's good. Oh, very, very clear. Yeah, I hope that answers your question, Olga. So Carrie Ann McDade's asking, well, saying she always loved your women's fiction and wants to know what inspired you to write a different genre, a very different genre in many ways.
You know, this is my accidental crime writer story. So as I was writing the women's fiction, I found the stories were getting a little bit more serious or deeper, and I wanted to write something that was not quite as lighthearted. So I started writing this a book, and I thought it was great. It was definitely a lot darker, a storyline, and I took it to an editor, and she said, oh, right, come and meet me in London. And I went, great, this is going to be good news, because you don't fly to London to meet somebody unless it's good news. Oh. And she actually went, no, but have you ever thought about writing a crime novel, a psychological thriller? Because I think you could rework this novel into a thriller. And I sort of went, no, I don't know how to do that. I can't do that. I had never ever even considered it. And she said, well, I think you can, thinking in, you know, your experiences and what you know from your career. And I went away, and I was initially like really downhearted, really, I'm never going to be able to do this. And then I thought, well, sure, if I don't give it a try, I'll never know. And I started writing Her Name is Rose, and I just loved it. I just loved writing the thrillers. I loved writing something really, really dark. I found it really good fun. I know it sounds like contradictory, but it was really, really good fun. And I fell in love with it. But, you know, obviously after a couple of books, I like writing the lighter stuff again now, and having that sort of palette cleanser where I can get really dark, really, really grim, and the worst of society with the thrillers. And then I can cheer myself up with cake and puppies and things, and you know, and a guaranteed happy ending with the rom-coms. So I think when you're writing so many books over such a long time, you have to keep it fresh. So I'm open to whatever way this career will take me.
Another person gets in touch to ask, why did you call the murdered woman in Forget Me Not the name Claire? It's a different spelling, but it is your name.
This is another really fun, no, it's not funny, it's just a really sad, boring story. She was originally called Eve, and somebody I know, one of my writer friends, had a book coming out at the same time, and there was a murdered woman, and she was called Eve, and I went, I can't have.
What have you done to me?
Do the same, but it was so close to deadline. I was like, I can't think of another name. Can't think of another name. I'll flip it. I'll just put Claire in and leave the I out. It was as unexciting as that.
It was a necessity.
Sorry, it was like necessity. It was just my brain was I think I'd written 3 books in a year, and I was like frazzled. And I just thought, "Oh, I can't think of a name that I haven't used yet. I know I
Yeah.
haven't used my own name, so that'll be grand." So I'm
If you're
sorry.
gonna put yourself in a book, you wouldn't kill yourself off in 4 pages as well. So,
Exactly. I might wait to the end of the book or something, you know. Yeah. But I thought, yeah, she's kind of a throw. This sounds terrible. She's kind of a throwaway character. She's gone in the first couple of pages, so I could do that. But I wish I had a really like life affirming story as to why she's called that, but it was just I was really stuck.
we did sort of touch on this question. How important is it to you to set some of your books in Derry?
It just it is, as I said, because I love Derry and I think Derry is a brilliant setting. But I also get like really fiercely protective of Derry. Like really like, well, why wouldn't you set a book in Derry? Like
Yeah.
what's wrong with Derry? And I do get that kind of attitude. Something when people say to me, "Oh, would you not try writing one set in America? That's worked amazingly for Steve Kavanagh and stuff." And I'm like, but Derry's what I know and those people, and they're great. And why would I not? If I read a book that's set in Dublin, I'm expected to, you know, be able to decipher Dublin sayings or, you know, colloquialisms and take that on board. Same with London, same with anywhere else. So why not make Derry that accessible to everybody else? So I just think, why not Derry?
Absolutely. Why not Derry? Another question. What age did you want to start journalism writing? Do you remember?
Do you know, I always wanted to be, always wanted to be a writer from as young as I can remember. So I remember being, must have been maybe 6 or 7 and drawing pictures of Cinderella on pages and then folding the pages over and like, I've made a book and handing it over. So it was always this like desire to storytell within me. And then when I was a teenager, I wrote some really terribly, awfully bad like poetry and awfully bad short stories that were so melodramatic, they were horrendous. But my friends used to read them and go, "Well, that's quite good." So it was always there. Making that into a career in terms of journalism. I did my work experience with the Derry Journal, so I sort of was able to see what that was like. And I loved the buzz of the newsroom. And then I also really was a big fan of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. And I thought maybe if I worked in the newsroom, yeah, I had the haircut and everything. I was there. So I thought if I work in a newsroom, maybe I'll meet Superman. Derry Journal doesn't have too many of those, unfortunately. But you know, it really was, how can I have a career in which I am paid to write? And journalism became sort of the obvious answer.
Another question. What's your favorite book that you've written? Do you have a favorite?
That I've written. It's like asking, do you have a favorite child? It depends which one's annoying you most or least at the time. My book that I think is my best book is The Nurse, which was out last year. And it touches on incel culture and stalkers, and for lots of reasons it's very, very topical at the time that it came out. Sarah Everard had unfortunately just been murdered, and there are circumstances that mirror that in the book, and I thought it was a really important message to get out, not only that women are at risk of being, you know, stalked or attacked, and the increase in murders of women by strangers, but also how young men are being failed and how they're being drawn into a system because of where we are as a society at the minute, our economics and everything. So I wanted to tell both sides of that. So as it all came together, it just, for me, it's my best book. I loved it. I loved writing it. It's really, really dark, but I loved writing it. And I think it's the most important book that I've written.
We'll we've about 5 minutes left, so we'll get through as many of these as we can. Breed's asked about what authors inspire you and your favorite book. We touched on your favorite book, but I mean, in terms of maybe ones who've historically inspired you.
Historic, gosh, well, I mean, when I started writing women's fiction, it was the likes of Marion Keyes and Patricia Scanlon and Kathy Kelly and all the great big Irish greats that I would have read. And now I draw, I suppose, who inspires me now. I draw inspiration. There's so many just amazing writers on this island. I think we don't realise how the wealth of talent that we have in such a small place. We have incredible writers like Liz Nugent, we have Jane Casey, we have Brian. It's just, oh my God, there's so many. There's so many. Joe Speedy, and I could go on and on and on. And I think their ambition and their showing that people from this wee island can do so incredibly well and write incredible stuff, that inspires me to keep writing.
Catherine's asking, what words of advice would you give to young aspiring writers?
The thing that I always say is, what I'm doing, and when I said you have to put your bum on the seat and you have to write, be that on your sofa or be it on your bed or your kitchen table or whatever else. Sit down and just start writing. In terms of learning the intricacies, the structures, whatever else, that will come. Just start writing what you want to write, what voices in your head. Just even go with like free exercises, free writing, where you're let your mind go wherever it wants to go, and something will spark in you and you will want to keep going on from there. And don't expect to write a full book in a couple of weeks. That's not how it works. 200 words a day when you're starting out, that's loads, that's tons. If you write more than that, brilliant. If you don't, it's grand. So go easy with yourself and sit your bum down, and also read and read and read.
This is what I actually want to know the answer to as well. What's the sandwich years, dear future self, that you've got written?
That's the next book that I'm writing.
You can't say.
Well, I can say a little bit about it. This will be the next Freya Kennedy book, and the sandwich years refers to women or men too of a certain age where you're stuck and you've got maybe adult children who are living at home because of how the world is nowadays, but you've got parents that you're having to care for a little bit as well, and you thought that this would be the stage of your life when you were able to do everything you wanted, but you're still caring for people, but you're also dealing with like empty nest syndrome and menopause and all this carry on. So it's how we find ourselves. It is going to be very funny, I promise you that. Dear Future Self is going to be my opening chapter. So it's going to be a chapter that the main character, Becky, a letter that she wrote herself when she was 16, saying how she thought her life would be when she was properly grown up. And then we'll find out that her life isn't quite as she anticipated. She's not married to Matt Goss or anything like that. It's really
our final 90 seconds. Here's a question. You share openly about your ADHD diagnosis on social media. Mm-hmm. I mean, how's that impacted your writing, and would you ever write a character with the same condition?
I would, and I want to do it. I want to do it right. I have been talking to somebody about a different kind of project, writing with a character with ADHD. I think it's really important to be like honest about how it affects me. I was at the start of this year, which is why I went and sought diagnosis. I was sort of an ADHD burnout, and I was really struggling to be able to concentrate, to work, to do anything. And I really did think I was broken as a writer. I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this. I didn't understand myself. I just thought I was rubbish. And after doing research, I thought, oh, it might actually be ADHD. And a surprising number of writers have ADHD. Maybe that's what makes it so good that we can switch from project to project to project. So getting help for that, and knowing what it is, has helped me refocus on my work. But I would love to tell like a really, really honest story of what it is like to try and be a functioning adult and not look like a complete idiot when your brain sometimes just goes off on its own wee wanders, and you find it very, very hard to keep your concentration. And it's also why I just rabbit a lot when I'm talking to people. And this moving your hands, apparently that's an ADHD thing as well. So it's all that nervous energy has to come out. So I it is definitely in the plan. It might be a different kind of project. It might be more TV orientated.
Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. We're pretty much out of time. That's the hour it's flown in.
Really has.
For today we're more or less done here. I'm going to squeeze one more in because I think it's a good one. About making your books into movies. Has that ever been an option?
It's like it's one of those we currently have. The Liar's Daughters currently been optioned by Hattrick, who made Dairy Girl. So we're trying to get a TV company or a streamer to take that on board. So I would love to be involved. If that gets taken on, I will be screenwriting that with another writer. Thanks to the brilliant Louise Gallagher, who has a Dairy Girl, who runs her own production company, and she also is script editor for Hattrick. The nurse is also with the production company, and fingers crossed for it. And then I was really lucky. I worked in the first series of Blue Lights, which was amazing. So
really?
Yeah, it's a dream to get one of mine fully on there, and I keep plugging away, and hopefully one of them will make it.
Well, look, best of luck, and look, thank you so much. Just before we go, Forget Me Not, it is the book of the month. Go read it. Claire sold it. I've sold it. If you've no excuses now. And look, thank you so much. It's been a joy speaking to you. Loads of book week events as well throughout the course of the week. Real chance to celebrate libraries, celebrate reading, and just have a bit of a chat. And thanks for everyone's questions. And thank you all so much for joining us today for this little in conversation. Claire, Allan, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.